Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We have on the line with us, we have Dave Taylor, and he is going to be talking about automation. And this is the first of three parts in this series about automating your greenhouse. My name is Tara Wilsworth. I handle marketing here at Prospiant. And I just wanted to mention that if you have any questions during the course of this webinar, please put them in the chat. If they're relevant to that particular slide, I will ask them at the time. If not, then we'll hang on and ask them at the end of the session. Our introduction here is Dave Taylor. He's our most recent general manager. This is a lovely photo of him and his wife. And he has 17 years experience. His name is known in the industry. People know who Dave Taylor is. So Dave, do you just want to give a quick, short overview of yourself and your introduction and your experience in the industry?
Sure. Hello, everyone. As Tara mentioned, my name is Dave Taylor. I've been in the industry for a number of years now. I started off at a company called Priva doing controls for greenhouses. Was a service technician for a few years there, moved into the sales department and worked as an account manager for a number of years there. About 3 years ago now, moved over to a company called Adept Ag after that. So again, working in electrical and controls for greenhouses before coming to Prospiant about 6 months ago, a little over 6 months ago now.
Yep.
So that's really me in a nutshell. But I've really had a great opportunity so far in the industry, and I'm really passionate about controls, which is why I agreed to do this talk. It's something that, probably isn't the most exciting thing talking about computers, but I mean, it is really essential when you think about the job that it does within the greenhouse. It's something that you're going to have throughout the life of the greenhouse and really start to rely on as one of your most used tools to be able to affect your growing. Okay. So no longer with me. We'll just go through a quick history of greenhouse controls. Greenhouses have been around since the Roman times. As soon as there was glass, there was greenhouses. So it's really gone from being an industry back in the 20s, 30s, all the way through till now. So in Holland especially, and I've got a couple of pictures here, but it started off as, small family-run greenhouses where, usually the house would be attached, or it would be a little small greenhouse on the side, to, if you look at the picture on the right, thousands of hectares now all around the world, growing just about everything that you can imagine in every setting. So it's really
is that photo in Holland?
It is, yeah. That's a picture of the Westland in Holland. Wow. So it's a pretty dense area. So if you look at, say, the Westland in Holland, actually even Holland in general, what is it? There's Querétaro in Mexico, a number of other places, but mainly Querétaro, the west coast of Canada, and actually a huge place in Spain called Almeria. If I'm saying that right. But those are your biggest greenhouse hubs throughout the world. But there are greenhouses pretty much anywhere there's people. So it's gone from little small niche things now to becoming a bigger industry. Although we're still considered a niche industry, this is a much bigger thing than it's ever been. So because now the size of the complexity of everything that's happened over the years, we've really had to take automation up to the next level, right? So on the left-hand side here, this is called a salamander heater. These were some of the first heaters that were put into greenhouses, right? Growers found that if you put oil in there and you lit it up, the CO2 coming from that heater would actually help the crops grow. So, they were using the CO2 and the heat to be able to keep the crops alive. Now we've gone to these massive, gigantic hot water heating systems that are heating greenhouses. Even things like, venting systems. Even when I started, there were still lots of greenhouses out there that use chains to open up the vents. I don't know that I've been in many greenhouses now that don't have some sort of automated venting system where it's run by electrically actuated motors. So we've come a long way from when we first started, but there is so much involved in all of it that it's really a good topic to talk about. So again, I hope I'm not going to bore anybody today, but what I wanted to talk about is we're going to go through about what is possible for controls. What's out there? What can you automate? What do you need to control out in your greenhouse? We're going to talk about types of automation options. What do you need? What to plan for, and then matching what you would need for your needs to the automation solution that's out there. A lot of this also as well too, as Prospient, we're a greenhouse builder, so a lot of this then will be tied back to the structure as well too, but I'm going to try and keep it as close to as a purely controls talk as possible. So realistically, with what's out there, there's just about nothing, just about everything in the greenhouse now that you can automate. I mean, we're going as far out there as robotics. We're going to save that for another talk when one of our others. But today I really want to just get into the basics of what is possible, what we can do. So when we talk about what's available, irrigating is a major point of the greenhouse, right? No water, no plants. So getting into, we can automate with booms, sprinklers, drip systems, automating your fertigation, all really important. And depending on what your needs are, the importance, varies, right? Heating, again, we can control unit heaters, boilers, radiant heat systems, really whatever is out there, as long as it can be actuated. And again, we'll get into that a little bit later. It's possible to control your heating in a greenhouse. And that has a number of different roles. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we get into it. Climate, again, probably one of the more important things, depending on where you are in the country. But if you're in any cold climate, controlling your climate can be a really big deal. I mean, it could be the difference between, growing plants and losing plants. So again, we'll talk about a little bit of that. And then I put lighting in there as well too. Lighting is it's basically on off for the most part, but now we're starting to see a lot more dimmable LEDs out there. People are talking more about DLI, energy savings. So that I think deserves a little bit more of a talk as well too. So if there are any questions as well too, yeah, as Tara said, please put them in the chat and we can either answer them, at the end or going forward, depending on how you get what the question is. So talking about automation possibilities. During my time, I've seen a lot of progression in what's possible for automation. And I've been in a lot of greenhouses. I've seen everything from, the standalone controllers to, again, when I worked for Priva, very integrated controllers. And so when I say a standalone controller, what I really mean is a controller that just controls one thing, right? So you have an irrigation timer or a timer to turn off and on the lights, a central thermostat that's going to open and close vents or turn on heating as needed. Those sorts of things, as I say, is a standalone control, right? And those are great depending on what you need, right? So each individual control takes care of its little bit. There's no influencing that control from another control. So, for example, the heating system is going to come on when it gets a little too cold and go off when it's warm enough. Your venting system, it's going to open the vents, to a certain point, depending on what the heating is, or depending on what the temperature is in the greenhouse. But none of that's really going to work together. The biggest thing about these systems is they're usually really cheap. So depending on what your crop is, what your needs are for that greenhouse, this really could be a good option because, again, starting out, you've just bought a greenhouse. You don't need a lot of really tight controls because, say, you're just finishing. You just really want to keep the plants alive long enough to be able to be able to sell them for retail. So, I mean, again, depending on what your needs are, controls like that might be perfectly fine for you. On the other side of that, though, you get into integrated control systems. Now, I just mentioned Priva because, again, we used to work there, but you got Hogendorn, Argus. There's a few others out there, Ritter as well, too. So, the four of those really make up, that higher end of the integrated controllers. The nice thing about those kinds of systems is that they are all integrated. Right. So an integrated control system gives you the opportunity to use all of your different pieces of equipment together to give you that output. So I mentioned before with the standalone controller, you could have a vent controller that is, opening and closing your roof. But if your heat controller is set a little too high, then you're always going to be above where your cooling control is. So you could be heating and venting at the exact same time, which is just literally throwing money out your windows, literally. So an integrated controller at least gives you that opportunity to be able to see everything all in the same place and be able to control things together. So you're not having one control fighting another, i.e., I'm not going to integrate, or I'm not going to turn on my lights when I don't, or I'm not going to irrigate when I don't have my lights on, or I'm not going to, yeah, I'm not going to run a boiler when I don't need heat for a heat storage tank or for my greenhouse, right? All of these things are then the benefits of the integrated controls, which is, I put in there, saves time and money as the last point in there. Realistically, saving time, just meaning that you don't have to go around to each of these controls and make the different settings, right? A lot of these more simpler standalone controls don't have, a user interface that you can use from your phone or on your computer. So you're literally going to the controller to make the settings, which is time that you're taking to go from place to place. And when you think about it, it could be a very small thing just to walk, 100 feet down the walkway to make that control. But if you make that walk, 1,000 times over that time adds up. So when I say it saves money, it could be something as simple as that. But also, if you look at your heating and cooling, like I just talked about, if you're heating that greenhouse and gas is, say, at, $6 or $7 per gigajoule, and you're literally just opening the vents to let all that heat out, yeah, that's where your real money savings comes in with having that integrated control. It is typically a lot more expensive to have this in there. Depending on what system you choose, what brand, how much software you're going to throw at it, it can be hundreds of times more expensive than what the standalone controls are. But when you look at the safety factors that also come into this as well too, you get alarms coming out of one system for all of your different things. So, a vent motor's not working, a boiler doesn't fire, your irrigation system doesn't go. You're going to get all those alarms in one central place, and usually to, your cell phone or your computer, maybe an alarm dialer. All of those things can then be integrated as well too. So again, I'm not saying that the integrated controller is for everybody, but just there are a lot more options that are involved in there, just really depending on what your needs are. So when we talk about, what controller you would need for your greenhouse, really we need to find out what you would be doing, right? So what are your goals? What are you trying to achieve when you're looking at automating some equipment, right? Some things to take into account. I mean, how big are you going to get, right? When we go back to talking about the standalone controls, I mean, if you're going to have hundreds of compartments spread out over tens of acres and you're trying to manage all that, by hand, is that really feasible? How many people are you going to need to make that feasible? So what are your goals long term? How big do you want to be? What do you want to grow? All of those things are then going to play into, what you're going to choose, right? So retail or commercial, like what's your crop, right? So if I used the example before, you're finishing for spring bedding plants, you may not need really tight controls. It's you may want that, may not need it, but whatever. It's less important, say, for the climate. But when you've, say, got 50 acres of tomatoes and you're trying to keep that temperature within 0.1, 0.2 degrees Celsius of what your set points are going to be in that area, because then you're going to mitigate risks like mildew on the crop, because too much heating and cooling at the same time is going to attract moisture, condensation, and then you end up with molds, mildews, those sorts of things. Or if I need my EC and pH to be exact and when I'm feeding the crop, because I'm in an inert substrate like a rock wool, for example, I really need to have those tight controls to be able to manage that. Whereas if I'm going into an all natural substrate, my pH is going to deviate as soon as that water hits that media. So you may not need that really, really tight control in your irrigation. So you may be able to save some money in some places and then spend it in others, which is really going to give you more bang for your buck. Is labor in it, right? So I've really just talked about computers for now, but I mean, I've been into a number of places where you see an army of people and there's a lot of hand watering going on. Again, when I worked at Adept Ag, we went to a greenhouse that did tissue culture, small plants, starts, and everything was hand watered. I think they had about 12 people that were just going around just watering every day. We installed a boom system in there, and it went down to 2 people spot watering from that point. So we're able to save 10 bodies in that greenhouse just by automating the watering of the plants going back and forth. And that's not even talking about fertilizer mixing or flow controls on that or anything. That's just a simple water delivery system that is going to be able to do that. And again, depending on what your needs are, you can go even simpler with something like sprinklers over the crop, which is probably about a quarter of the price of what a boom system would be. Again, pluses and minuses on all of that, on how accurate you want to be. But at the end of the day, do you really need to save labor, or is getting labor an issue? Starting to look at those sort of automation solutions could be, the difference between making money that year or not. So again, when I'm talking about this, I'm not just talking about computers, but I'm also talking about what other hardware is available as well too, to be able to automate your greenhouse. How much time am I spending in the greenhouse? People surprisingly don't look a lot at this. Depending on what your goal is, if you are going to be, you've got a small, say, acre greenhouse, and I know acre isn't necessarily small, but I mean, you have an acre greenhouse, you're going to be in there every day. You're going to be walking the crop. All of the people that are going to be working. Where your gotchas are going to be at every single square centimeter of that greenhouse. So investing in a really tight system to be able to automate, it just might not be something that you want to spend the money on, because you're there all the time. What's happening at all times in the greenhouse. So spend less on controls because you're making up for that with more time. But if you've got, say, again, I use the example, 50 acres of tomatoes, right? You can't be everywhere all at once. So you're really going to have to use your time in the greenhouse very efficiently. And therefore, you're not going to be able to spend as much time in there. So investing in, say, a higher end system to be able to monitor all of your pumps, all of your drives, all of the vents, what the temperatures are, all of these things then integrating in, then that starts to make a lot more sense, because you're going to be able to manage more with less people. If you imagine that, if we go back, say, 40 years to when green farming really came to North America in earnest, we had, half an acre greenhouse that was managed by a family. And so every morning, mom, dad, sons, daughters would go out there and literally pull the chains to open the vents. And then as a cloud would come across, lower the chains. And, I know people locally here, located in the Leamington area, who that was their childhood. When they grew up, they would go out there, and 5-6 times a day, they would go out and open and close the vents to be able to maintain that temperature out in the greenhouse, looking at a thermostat that's sitting on a post. I mean, that was just how it was done. But again, those were much smaller greenhouses where you were in there all the time, you were working it. Again, now with 50 acres, I mean, you would need an army of people just to be able to do that, right? So the importance of what size your farm is, but then how much time you really want to be in the greenhouse really plays into what kind of controls you're going to select, right? How much can I control that greenhouse when I'm not physically there, right? Can I use my cell phone to log in at all times? Can I, use my laptop if I'm sitting on a beach in Barbados or wherever, right? How do you want to manage that greenhouse becomes a big part of that. And then where my greenhouse located, that is probably your most important thing. I can't stress this enough. I mean, we're up here in Canada. We get a pretty cold winter. So things like your boiler become extremely, extremely important, right? It goes below 0 degrees Celsius, even above that. You're heating that greenhouse even on a sunny day. So where you are located plays such a major role in this because of your outside conditions, right? You can imagine if you're coastal California, for example, you probably don't need as much automation to be able to grow that crop efficiently. I've been to farms in Mexico where it's, the level of automation there is pretty low because, I mean, it's 22, 23 degrees during the day, 18 degrees at night. There's really not much that you need to be able to do for your climate, right? So it's more focusing on irrigation. And then again, that goes back to what your goals are going to be for that. So greenhouse location does play a big, big part in how much you really should be looking at spending on what your greenhouse controls are going to be. Greenhouse types and automation. So this is where we get into, again, we sell greenhouses. So, all the different types of greenhouses out there really could dictate, what you're buying. But again, the greenhouse is really, you're purchasing that greenhouse for that crop. So you can have a large Venlo structure, which say the majority of vegetable growers out there today are putting in. So we're seeing, I think our largest build to date is somewhere around 70 acres in that neighborhood, if I could guess at it. So again, it's 70 acres of all Venlo. It's a pretty big investment, but at the same time, it depends. If I'm spending that much on that greenhouse, I'm probably going to invest a lot more in my automation, right? Try and automate everything as much as possible to make sure that that crop is as well taken care of as possible. The size of your investment, again, in the greenhouse is really going to make a difference. I mean, the other side to that coin is that, if I've got a hoop house or something, I'm probably not going to spend a ton of on the automation on that because I'm only going to use it for part of the year. My controls options in there are probably going to be pretty small because I'm not going to have room for a large heating system, a lot of HAF fans, irrigation maybe. But again, it all depends on, how you've planned out to grow, what you've done. And like we said, too, the structure, again, really depends on what your business is going to be. So if you've got, say, a retail greenhouse, again, you're probably going to maintain the temperature and humidity with controllers, but you're probably still going to go and do a lot of your watering by hand. So again, your structure can play a really big part in how you're choosing a control system for that greenhouse. You also have to think about, too, is that when you're building that greenhouse, if I do want to put in lights, if I want to put in a boom system, if I want to put in a misting system later on, is that structure that I've purchased going to be strong enough to support all of that infrastructure on the trusses, on the posts? Where am I going to put this stuff? How is it all going to be? So when you're looking at your structure, typically it's a good idea to start thinking about what pieces of automation I want to have in there as well, too. They always say that afterthoughts are expensive. And yeah, again, if we all of a sudden want to start doing things where we're hanging a lot of weight on our trusses on the greenhouse, we're really going to need to make sure that, the greenhouse is engineered for that and that we have all that infrastructure in place to be able to take that automation that you want to put into the greenhouse and, really, really make it possible. So then we get into, okay, how do we plan for all of these things before I start building the greenhouse? And where I start building the greenhouse is also pretty relevant to what I'm going to be doing, right? So power. Over the years, we've had a lot of people that said, yep, nope, I've got a great piece of land. We're going to put in a greenhouse. We're going to build it here. Great. And we start talking about power and, things like, do you have single phase or three phase? Do you have natural gas feed to the farm, or is it going to be run on propane, or is it going to be some other method of heating? The facilities that you have available to you on that piece of property, they're also going to dictate, what kinds of automation that you can put into that greenhouse as well, too. So, power, especially single phase or three phase. Three phase is typically far more efficient, especially when you get into bigger structures with bigger motors, fans. Things are going to be running more. You're going to get more efficiency out of a three-phase system than you are out of a single-phase system. Another thing that is really becoming more and more relevant is, do I have high-speed internet connection? Can I get that? I know with now Starlink, it's becoming more available. But again, if I'm going to put, millions of dollars of infrastructure and millions of dollars of crop every year in a spot, having high-speed, reliable internet in that area becomes really critical, because then things like alarms, remoting into your computer from afar really becomes a big deal. I know that I used to deal with a lot of some places in Mexico that had absolutely no internet connection at all. So anytime there'd be any support calls or anything, it was really difficult to diagnose an issue. And, being able to log in for the technicians and for yourself to be able to see the computer is a really big deal. So having high-speed internet available to wherever you're going to build the greenhouse should really be a consideration when we're talking about controls. Another
What
thing,
happens if there is no connection? I mean, what happens if you're going to be building in a very rural area with no connection? Do you have to have a high-speed internet?
you don't need it, but again, it is a pretty good idea to have it there, only because the serviceability of the equipment and your ability to be able to see your crop really becomes critical, depending on what it is, right? Like, I mean, if you're doing something that's a very hardy crop, I don't know, grapevine starts, and I could be saying something completely wrong here, but I'm just using this as an example where, it's going to see temperature fluctuations, and you're going to have to go through a hardening off period for that crop anyway. It may not be the big deal if, in the springtime when it's, 3 or 4 degrees Celsius outside, that temperature drops right down. That might not be a big deal. But again, if you've got, say, a cannabis crop in there that you really don't want to see large fluctuations, because then you're going to start to see issues in the crop, it is really, really not a good idea. It becomes critical that you do have that good high-speed internet. So if you don't have it, that could be completely fine. But again, it just goes back to, what are your goals, right? What are you trying to grow? And then what safety do you want to have on that crop to make sure that you don't have any losses later on? That's really where it stems from.
Makes sense.
Yeah. Space for irrigation. I have seen this overlooked 1,000 times. There is a certain, if you're going to have a fully automated irrigation system go into your crop, you're not planning on doing a lot of hand watering, having the right amount of space to be able to set up a proper irrigation room, it's critical. I know that especially during the cannabis days, we saw this a lot with indoor grows where, there would be a large growing space, say, thousands and thousands of square feet for growing space. And then you would have basically a closet for your irrigation. That doesn't give us room for pumps. It doesn't give us a room for water storage. It doesn't give us room to really build out all the things that we need to be able to build out to make that irrigation system work. And then we get into issues where, if we don't have all of that room, then we could say the water mains get shut off outside, even for an hour. All of a sudden, your plants don't get water. It's really something that you want to think about up front when you start building the greenhouse, and not have it be an afterthought. I can't stress this enough, how many times I've seen that, the irrigation becomes an afterthought. And I think I said it already in this presentation, that without water, you don't have plants. Really think about that as one of your most important things, right? Again, going back to cannabis, the main consideration was always lights. Lighting was always the first thing that people looked at. And lighting, while it is important, especially in an indoor grow, again, without water, you're not going to have a crop. So I just say it one last time. I can't stress enough how important it is to really think about the irrigation that you want to be able to do for your crop before you build that greenhouse. And again, less important, but still just as important. If you have a greenhouse now that you want to automate, or you're thinking about a greenhouse, spacing out where you want your control panels, your electrical panels, that's all going to become pretty important too. A little less space needed. Usually a decent controls electrician will be able to find space for it. So it's not the end of the world, but just something to think about. Almost as critical as what system you're going to put in, where is my support going to come from that system? We have not we, but I've seen people before that have bought systems out of China to be able to control their greenhouses, to control their growing areas. And then as soon as something's wrong, they have zero support for this. I can't stress enough how critical this is. You need support that's local from an electrician. You need to have control support, irrigation support, something that you know is going to be reliable to you. Again, you can buy the most fancy equipment in the world. You can automate everything in your greenhouse, but when things break down, and they just will. It's just the fact of the matter. You need to make sure that you have somebody that's available there. So Tara, like you mentioned earlier, what if you're building out in the middle of nowhere? That's fine. But then having things like the high-speed internet, reliable power, those then are going to become even more critical if you are out somewhere where you don't have support that's, an hour away or something. You're going to want to be able to call somebody that you're going to need them to log in and be able to take care of the issue right away. And
so they can do most of the support via, remotely, correct?
Sorry, say that again?
Most of the support can be done remotely, correct?
A lot of the support nowadays can be done correctly. I mean, when I first started, we had dial-up internet at most places, and it was a little painful for everyone, but the job got done. I mean, now if I ever logged into somebody's computer, I mean, whether, I'm in Niagara and they're in California, it's absolutely no problem. It's like I'm there. So it is a pretty important step, and especially with how complex things are getting for the bigger facilities these days, it's even more critical to be able to log in, because you can imagine there are systems like some of the previous systems that I worked on over the years would have literally tens of thousands of settings that could be made for that greenhouse. And if one or two settings are off in the wrong place, and all of a sudden you're not getting the output from your systems that you would expect to get. So being able to log in, say for the technician, to be able to go through everything that they know could be the problem, instead of saying, okay, well, I need you to go here, I need you to go here. It's going to cut down the support time. It's going to cut down the cost. It's going to cut down the frustration. It's going to become that much more critical for them to be able to do that. So the support, yes, it can be done remotely, but there are also things too that you need to consider about, if I have an irrigation system and my pump goes bad, go back to it again, like no water, no crop. So how do I get that support on site to be able to take care of those things as they break, right? Event motor goes, okay, fine. We can take a little bit more time to get that figured out. But things like water, things like, really water is your major one. Without that, your crop will not grow, right? And I've seen people lose an entire crop because the irrigation was turned off, or they lost a pump and didn't have a backup and didn't have people go there and fix it. It is really, really a big consideration when you think about this. And I saw this all the time as well too, dealing with the high-end structures as well too, because we would have a lot of international companies come in and build greenhouses, provide the computer system, provide all of that. But then the after support was never there because they didn't have somebody local. They didn't have, and so you're relying on somebody in Europe to be able to answer the phone, say, I don't know, way after hours. Imagine you're in California and you need support at 10 o'clock in the morning. Everywhere's already closed in Europe with that huge time difference, right? So getting support may be difficult. So it's just where my support is coming from when I'm going to select a system becomes really, really critical. And it's something that is vastly overlooked. And, I've seen it 100 times where people have chosen something because it's price-based, but at the end of the day, the second one always comes where that becomes a major consideration because there has been a problem. And even it may not be something as serious as you lose an entire crop, but it really could be, something as, okay, I lost a set of tomatoes, which is a huge dollar amount. I lost a number of blooms on my flowers. Becomes a big deal, right? It's not going to bankrupt somebody, but at the same time, it does hurt the bottom line. So yeah, support I can't stress it enough. And then last but not least, what is my structure designed for? I think we talked about it a little bit earlier, but I mean, is my structure designed to be able to take all of those automation points? Are my trusses strong enough to be able to hang lights from? Can I get a misting system that's far enough above the crop where I'm going to get a nice even dispersion of that humidity across the crop? you know, even curtain systems. Can I put in a curtain system on the structure that I have because I want to be able to save money? Again, it all goes back to a lot of planning. I mean, it's not just about, you know, the price of the greenhouse. It's not just about, you know, what you want to do now. Thinking of 5 years, 10 years ahead really is going to end up saving you, you know, tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in the future. Because then going back and having to retrofit things, you're paying twice for you know, the same technology. It becomes critical. And when you talk about a structure, which is usually a fairly big chunk of what the overall investment is going to be, if my structure is not going to meet my needs going forward, then it might not be the right structure for me. So, you know, work with your salespeople. You know, when you're looking at structure, and really talk to them about what is going to be your next steps. Where do you want to be 5, 10 years from now? And then that will really dictate, you know, what the right structure is for you.
Okay.
And then last but not least, questions. I know we're booked for an hour, but this is the first of 3. So today was really just an introduction to what we're doing. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask. But in the next ones, we'll start to get into, say, higher end automation, AI, robotics, things of that nature for our next ones. So I hope today was okay, but please, if you have any questions, please ask.
There's also a couple of email addresses here if you want to send emails to Dave directly, or to the info email box, which does get monitored periodically during the day. You can do so as well. As Dave mentioned, our next webinar is about semi-automation, and then the final one will be about full automation. The next one is on the 11th of November, and then the final one is on the 9th of December. So sign up for those. They're also in BrightTalk. And send us any questions that you might have. Thanks very much, Dave. I really appreciate your time. And yeah, so we will see you in a month from now.
Looking forward to it. And the next one, we're going to have other vendors in there as well to talk about their controls, to talk about, you know, what they do with automation, as well as hopefully a grower or two within there as well too. So looking forward to those.
That would be great. That'd be real life examples from people actually using the systems.
Exactly.
All right.
All right.
Okay. Well, thanks very much. Thanks, everybody. And we'll speak to you next month.
All right. Thank you
Bye.
very much. Bye-bye.